it's my name at IS Academy, and today we are going to see current affairs from economy. Earlier we have seen current affairs from international relation, environment, economy. We are in a series of completing 1000 plus current affairs within 20 days, and in that series now we are going to see current affairs from economy. So let's get started. First, accommodative monetary policy. So accommodative monetary policy is nothing but the central government will cut the interest rates to inject money into the financial system whenever needed. That is called as accommodative monetary policy. So let me explain my point. So first, central government is going to cut the interest rates. So our central government is RBI. RBI will reduce their repo rates. Say RBI has reduced the repo rate. Then what happens is, if the RBI has reduced their repo rate, then the banks will also reduce their interest rate. If the bank has also reduced their interest rate, then the people will be so interested in borrowing, and the amount of borrowing will be increased. If the borrowing has increased, then money will be introduced into the market. So this is accommodative monetary policy. So accommodative monetary policy is the central government will cut the interest rates to inject money into the market. So that is accommodative monetary policy. Then we have inflation target. So inflation target is nothing but, we have already seen what is inflation. Inflation is nothing but it is the persistent rise in price level. So that is called as inflation, and we have a target to be achieved, and that is inflation target. And for India it is 4 plus or minus 2. Let us say 4 plus 2. If it is 4 plus 2, then it is 6. If it is 4 minus 2, it is 2. Our inflation target is from 2 to 6. Our inflation should be between 2 to 6. So 2 is the lower tolerance level, where 6 is the upper tolerance level. If our inflation target, if our inflation exceeds the upper tolerance level, then it is considered as failure to meet the inflation target. And if our inflation goes down below the lower tolerance level, then it is also considered as failure to meet the inflation target. So that is failure to meet the inflation target if it has not able to achieve this for 3 consecutive quarters. If it is not possible to achieve it for 3 consecutive quarters, then it is considered as failure to meet the inflation target. So let me repeat my point. So inflation is the persistent rise in price level, and we have an inflation target for India, and that is 4 plus or minus 2. So it is 6 to 2. Our inflation should be between 2 to 6, and 2 is the lower tolerance level and 6 is the upper tolerance level. And if our inflation is below the lower tolerance level, then it is considered as failure to meet the inflation target. If it is if it is below 2 for the 3 consecutive quarters. And likewise, if our inflation is greater than upper tolerance level for 3 consecutive quarters, then it is considered as failure to meet the inflation targets. So this is about inflation target. Then we have primary deficit. So primary deficit, we have a formula. So primary deficit is equal to fiscal deficit minus interest payments. So in primary deficit, what we do is we subtract the interest payments from the fiscal deficit. So primary deficit is the difference between fiscal deficit and the interest payments. So in primary deficit, the burden of the past debt is not included. So burden of past debt is not included in the primary deficit. So that is primary deficit. So primary deficit is the difference between fiscal deficit and the interest payments, and the burden of past debt is not included in the primary deficit. Then we have tax buoyancy. So tax buoyancy is nothing but, so if there is an increase in GDP, then there will be generally increase in the tax collection. If GDP has increased and the tax collection, the tax revenue has also increased, then it means there is a good tax buoyancy. But if there is a GDP growth but there is no tax increase, then it is called thus bad tax buoyancy. This is tax buoyancy. So why this happens? If there is a GDP growth, why the tax revenue did not increase? There are 2 reasons for it. One is there is tax evasion. If there is tax evasion, then even if GDP increases, the tax has not increased. Or else the GDP growth is in non-tax sectors. Say non-tax sectors. For agriculture, the tax is not collected by the center. If there is a growth in agricultural sector, the tax revenue of the center is not going to increase, right? So tax buoyancy is nothing but, if there is an increase in GDP, there should be an increase in tax revenue, which means there is a good tax buoyancy. But if there is an increase in GDP, but if there is no increase in tax revenue, it means that is bad tax buoyancy. In bad tax buoyancy, the reasons for it is two. One is tax evasion. The people are escaping from the tax, that is tax evasion, and the two is the growth is in non-tax sectors of the GDP. So there is a GDP increase, but the GDP increase is because of the growth in the non-tax sectors. Example, we can say agriculture. Agriculture doesn't fall under the tax regime of the central government. Central government is not collecting the agricultural tax, right? Agricultural income tax, right? So such growth will not lead to increase in tax collection. So these are the reasons for tax buoyancy. And then we have capital receipts. Capital receipts are the one in which it will create liabilities or it will reduce the assets. So there are two types of receipts which we have already seen. One is revenue receipt and another one is capital receipt. Revenue receipt, in that we have two. One is tax, another one is non-tax form. Under tax we have many taxes. We have corporate tax, income tax, we have direct tax, indirect tax, GST. All the taxes come under this tax revenue of the government. The government is going to get some revenue from the taxes which we pay, and there are non-tax revenue for the government. Example for non-tax revenue, let us say the transportation fee. So we are paying something as a transportation charge, right, to the public buses. We are using public buses and we are paying a fee for it, right? So the transportation charges that we pay is a revenue for the government and it comes under the revenue receipt. And also the postal charges. So postal department is under the government. The postal charges which we pay and the revenue which it is getting from the postal department comes under the revenue receipt. Whereas under the capital receipt will create liabilities. There are two things which it can do. It create liabilities or else it will reduce the asset. This is the two things which it will do. One is it create liabilities or else it will reduce the asset. Example for reducing asset, we can say disinvestment. Disinvestment is nothing but government will sell its share. So government has reduced its share in a public sector company. So if it has reduced its share by itself, then it is called as disinvestment. So by disinvestment, government is going to get some money. Example, we can say privatization of railways and selling the LIC. By selling the shares of the government, it is going to get some money, but it is going to reduce its asset. So if it is reducing the asset, then it comes under the capital receipt. Example, we can say disinvestment and recovery of loans also reduce the asset. Example, we can say if you have given loan for say 1000 rupees and if you are getting some interest out of it, then that interest is your income. So you are getting an income from it. But if you have recovered this 1000 rupees, then you are not going to get income from it. So that means that is your income, your asset has reduced. So recovery of loans and disinvestment comes under reducing the assets, whereas creating liabilities is nothing but borrowing. If you have borrowed, then it creates liabilities, right? You need to repay it at some time. So it creates liabilities. So borrowing from the public provident fund and small saving deposits comes under the capital receipts. Then we have GSEC. So GSEC is nothing but government securities. Government securities is considered as the safest form of investment and the risk is almost nil. But there will be a fluctuation in interest rate. But still it is considered as the safest form of investment. So GSEC is nothing but it is a debt instrument issued by the government for borrowing money. So it is a debt instrument issued by the government to borrow money. And there are two types of GSEC. One is we have short-term investment, another one is we have long-term investment. The short-term investment are called as treasury bills, whereas the long-term investment are called as dated securities. So GSEC is nothing but it is a debt instrument issued by the government to borrow money. It is issued to borrow money and it is the safest form of investment and the risk is almost nil. But still there will be a change in interest rate. But there will be a fluctuation in interest rate. And there are two types of GSECs. One is treasury bills and another one is dated securities. Treasury bills are short-term instruments whereas dated securities are long-term instruments. These treasury bills will mature anywhere in between of 91 days, 182 days and 364 days. These treasury bills are short-term instruments which will mature anywhere between 91 days, 182 days or 364 days. Whereas this dated securities are long-term instruments which mature anywhere between 5 years and 40 years. So these are about GSEC. Then we have CAR. CAR stands for Capital Adequacy Ratio. CAR stands for Capital Adequacy Ratio. It is the ratio of the bank's capital to its risk. It is the ratio of bank's capital to its risk. Bank capital divided by risk. So it is the ratio of, in other words, we can say it as, it is the ratio of the bank's capital in relation to its risk-weighted assets and current liabilities. So that is capital adequacy ratio. It is also called as capital to risk-weighted assets ratio. And the thing which you should note in capital adequacy ratio is, if CAR, if capital adequacy ratio is high for a bank, then it is considered as the safest bank. If capital adequacy ratio is high, it is considered as the safest bank, and capital adequacy ratio is fixed by the Reserve Bank of India. RBI will fix this capital adequacy ratio, and this capital adequacy ratio is suggested in the Basel III banking norms also. The Basel III banking norms suggested capital adequacy ratio to be 8%, but the RBI fixed the capital adequacy ratio to 9%. So in India, currently the capital adequacy ratio to be maintained is 9%. So these are the things relating to capital adequacy ratio. Capital adequacy ratio is the ratio between bank's capital to its risk. In other words, we can say it is the ratio of the bank's capital in relation to its risk-weighted assets and current liabilities. So if there is high capital adequacy ratio, then that bank is considered as the safest and the healthiest bank, and the capital adequacy ratio is fixed by the Reserve Bank of India. In Basel III norms, they suggested capital adequacy ratio to be 8%, but in India, RBI fixed the capital adequacy ratio to 9%. So these are the things which are relating to capital adequacy ratio. Then we have DFI. DFI stands for Developmental Financial Institution. It is also called as Development Bank. It is Developmental Financial Institution or Development Bank. It provides risk capital. It provides a risk capital, and it is provided for the economic development. So the main thing is it provides risk capital for the economic development for non-commercial basis. It provides risk capital for the economic development on a non-commercial basis, and the first DFI which was operationalized in India is in 1948. In 1948 only we had our first developmental financial institution, and it is IFCI, Industrial Finance Corporation. Industrial Finance Corporation is the first development finance institution in India which was operationalized since 1948, and then we had in 1955 we had ICICI, which is also a development finance institution when it was started. Then we had IDBI. IDBI is in 1964. These are some of the developmental finance institution. Why developmental finance institution is in use is, our government in budget proposed to set up a developmental financial institution for the national infrastructure pipeline. So what developmental finance institution is in use? So developmental finance institution is nothing but it is the risk capital. The developmental finance institution will provide risk capital for the developmental projects, for the economic development on a non-commercial basis, and the first DFI in India is operationalized since 1948, and it is IFCI. IFCI is the first DFI in India, and then we had ICICI in 1955 and IDBI in 1964. These are some of the other developmental finance institutions. And during the pre-liberalized era, India had DFIs that were primarily engaged in the development of industry. So before the pre-liberalized era means before 1991, the DFI which we had focused more on industrial development. So focused more on industrial development. These are the things which are relating to DFI. Then we have external financing, banking, privatization. So we can see these things in our next videos. So subscribe to My Lemonade IAS Academy. Thank you.